So, MrBeast is one of the most popular YouTube creators right now, and when Amazon Studios announced that it is making a reality show with him, expectations were really high. But now some contestants say the production is dangerous and unsafe. Today on the podcast, how MrBeast's reality show went wrong. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, look, this new show, it's called Beast Games. It's set to be the largest reality show in history. It's going to have 2,000 contestants. They're competing for a $5 million prize. It is the TV version of everything that MrBeast does with his YouTube content. And MrBeast, whose real name is Jimmy Donaldson, has complete creative control. But the production, which just finished filming in Toronto, is being compared to the Fire Festival. We're hearing about injuries on set. We're hearing about not enough food. We're hearing about dangerous working conditions. And now some of those contestants have filed a class action lawsuit against MrBeast and Amazon Studios, which is producing the show. Steven Asarch is a reporter who has interviewed a bunch of cast members. You can read his in-depth piece in Rolling Stone. He's with us right now. Steven, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, of course, I'm happy to have you here. I think we should maybe start with the basics. Can you just describe this show? Can you describe what MrBeast is trying to make? What is the vision of Beast Games?
Sure. So from my understanding and speaking with all my sources, Beast Games is one of MrBeast's videos put on steroids. It is
Okay.
How far and how crazy can you put a reality show and put contestants through? Challenges range from simple things like trivia, all the way to, dropping through a trap door because you needed to knock over a tower with a dodgeball.
I think, first of all, I love that description because that is everything that his YouTube content is. I'm like, he seems to sometimes think of just like these random games and go, I put two people in a room and just to see how long they can survive in that room, and then the person that can last the longest, gets $1 million. That's typically his sort of shtick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now we get to Beast Games. You've interviewed dozens of cast and crew members for your investigation. I know that a lot of these people signed NDAs, so you can't entirely give me everything that they told you. But generally, what complaints did you hear from them?
Yeah, so I learned that the Beast Games was basically run for as little as possible, is what it seemed to the crew members I spoke with. There was always a sense that everything had to be rushed. Everything needed to be done quickly and efficiently and had to be done quickly as possible. They were all non-union. It was specifically a non-union production. And a lot of these crew members had never worked on anything similar because nothing had ever existed like this before. It's the first reality show of that size, and they've never done anything even, this wild. So it said they weren't fed properly. It said that safety regulations were kind of pushed to the side, that it was a kind of a rushed scenario. At one point, there was a record-breaking rainfall and the hangars were starting to flood, and they kind of kept working through it. They stopped production, but the crew members still had to make sure the equipment wasn't going to be submerged.
The idea of making the largest show possible, but making it as quickly as possible, like that's already sort of a recipe for like how a lot of things could go wrong in that little combination. There's been a lot of comparison to the Fire Festival. In this one crew member sort of compared it to the Fire Festival. Do you want to talk about that comparison? How so? How does that comparison sort of hold up, you think?
Sure. The Fire Fest, from the documentaries I've watched,
Yes.
was very much like a vision that it was putting to rich people. Like, you can go to this amazing island and have all the fun in the world. But when you got there, it was kind of not what they expected. And the employees who had to set up this whole thing were basically left with a massive bill and a bunch of problems they didn't plan on it.
Right.
When it comes to the Beast Games, there was this promise to MrBeast's audience that this is going to be the greatest thing you've ever seen, that this is going to blow your minds. We're doing it so quickly. Amazon has given me full creative control. And don't you guys love when I have full creative control? So when it came to, and now the crew members are basically being treated like the employees who had to work with Firefest, where they're kind of like screwed over and confused and not sure what just washed over them.
Oh, so I want to talk about a sequence of events that I think is interesting, which is like right after your story comes out, we learn that this class action lawsuit against MrBeast and Amazon has been filed in LA. In that class action lawsuit, obviously there are allegations. How do those allegations add to your understanding of the problems of Beast Games?
Sure. So the allegations in the story are mostly from what I had heard in like the New York Times reporting and what had gone around online.
Yeah.
There's some claims of sexual misconduct, which are completely blacked out, so we don't actually know what those claims are.
Hmm.
But overall, the conditions in Vegas, which Beast PR says is because of the CrowdStrike outage, um, were not very good, and they feel that they were employees, which again, I'm not entirely sure
Sure.
if reality show contestants should be considered employees, but they were, they listed a lot of the things about not getting food, sleeping on the floor of the stadium, having to deal with the chaos of everything, medications,
Mm-hmm.
things we already knew, but like the lawsuit kind of brought it to a whole new level that the mainstream media is kind of getting into.
Mm-hmm.
Like on the internet, we kind of knew about this, but once it reaches the mainstream is when things start to get more interesting.
So can I just say, Stephen, like I am familiar enough with MrBeast's content. I'm sort of getting to the point where I'm like, I don't think I can stand the Beast, X. Like just like the branding of everything is like you just said Beast PR, and I was like, Stephen, no, don't do this. But also Beast Games as this idea, like there is something to be said about MrBeast sort of at the center of all of these sort of conversations. Your piece contains a quote from MrBeast. His real name is Jimmy Donaldson. Again, I'm going to read that quote. The quote is, "Amazon gave me the creative control I need to try to make this happen. Money is not a constraint, and I could also just do anything." From the first call, Amazon was like, yeah, that makes sense. You have control. They were literally like, you're the master. That's the quote that you have. How did that translate on set based on the conversations that you had with people?
From my understanding, MrBeast was the one in charge of creative. Like he
Mm.
was the one who decided what challenges were going to be made
Mm-hmm.
and what was going to happen. Like the production company on set was the one who had to make sure everything was going to go as his vision entailed.
Sure.
Um, MrBeast has always been really into controlling what he does. Like even when it comes to his videos and the employees I've spoken with, it is very much like you are following MrBeast's image.
Mm.
I don't even think of MrBeast as a person anymore. I think of him more as a corporate mascot.
As a brand,
Like
yeah. Yeah.
he's Mickey Mouse, the modern kids Mickey Mouse.
Sure. Did you get the sense that people are afraid of him? Did you get a sense that like people are a little bit worried or anxious about how
You
they?
have to tiptoe around Jimmy
Yeah.
because Jimmy's attitude determines if you're employed or not.
Hmm.
People are definitely the ones I've spoken with know that Jimmy has a temper. And if you upset him, you could potentially be unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've spoken to at least one former employee who felt that way. It's basically just like imagine if when you were a teenager, you were given the golden ticket and said you were amazing, and you now have connections with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk.
Sure.
Like that does something to a brain, I think.
It would change you. It would change your
Yeah,
approach.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I want to add that we spoke with a former crew member who requested anonymity because they didn't sign an NDA. They described a bunch of young YouTubers who'd been empowered with an almost unlimited budget, right? Overseeing a crew of people with decades of TV experience. Those things sort of don't go well together. He said part of the problem is that they were used to making YouTube content, but had no idea what they were doing on a set that was that size. That seems to square, I think, with the stuff that you're reporting. Is part of the problem here that they just didn't have the required experience to take the YouTube stuff and make it at scale?
Well, there is no precedent. Like the required experience doesn't exist because no one has ever taken a YouTube video style like this and tried to transition it into the mainstream. Like we've had some YouTubers who did like YouTube originals, like Scare PewDiePie, which is, as the title says, trying to scare PewDiePie.
Yes.
But nothing that is remotely similar to trying to take 1,000 contestants in Toronto and create a reality show based on it.
It's one thing for like an NBC to say we're going to create the largest reality show ever. They could scale Survivor, right? They could scale the shows that they already make, but the idea that you would just take the stuff that you need to make a YouTube show and then scale that requires an entirely different understanding, I think, of the industry. MrBeast's production guide, which is a document that all new employees get when they're hired, was leaked last week, and you've read the whole thing. I want to read a line that really jumps out, which is, "This is not Hollywood, and I do not want to be Hollywood. And if that sentence is a turnoff to you, then you're probably at the wrong job." What did you learn from this document, Steven?
Sure. So the document was leaked maybe a month ago, I think, by YouTuber Rosanna Pansino. I spoke to a few former Beast employees and was able to confirm its legitimacy. The contract itself is fascinating because it really goes in depth on how Jimmy looks at the YouTube, which is as analytically as possible.
Right.
There are pages breaking down minutes 1 through 3, 3 through 6, 6 through 9, trying to really again, create the formula on what is virality. And when it comes to that, there's a lot of, you need to give me what you think I want. Like, there's a section on there where he's like, give me when you come up to me with an idea, make sure you have multiple fail safes, like a half dozen other ideas to make sure. Because what if I don't like the first one? You got to keep making sure that I'm happy.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why the contract is so all over the place.
So I want to touch on something that I think is worth noting here, which is that ACTRA, which is a union that represents crew members here in Canada, they issued a do not work order for its members, warning them about this production. It's not unusual, I think, for reality shows to be non-unionized, but do you think that the industry is going to be more cautious in the future, given just everything that we hear about this production?
So from the crew members I've spoken with, what they're worried is that the Beast Games will become more the norm and rather than the outlier. Because the Beast Games basically proves that you can hire an entire non-union staff, have multiple injuries, crew members speak out about bad abuse, and still make a reality show. You know, they don't have to worry about all those regulations and issues. So what if that basically, they worry that there are so many non-union workers, like the film and television industry in Canada right now is in a bad place after the writer's strike, after COVID. Things haven't really bounced back. And now there are all these non-union workers who basically have nowhere to be. And they had to take the Beast Games. They didn't want to take the Beast Games, but they felt like they had to in order to afford their bills. So my worry, and the worry of these crew members I've spoken with, is that this will kind of become the norm, and people will just kind of have to deal with these chaotic, situations that most normal film sets don't have.
Stephen, it occurs to me that I keep forgetting, because we've seen so much of the story, that we still haven't seen Beast Games, right? Like the show is not out in the world. And so we don't know when that's going to actually be screening for people. But let me just ask you this. Just based on that lesson, I got maybe 30 seconds left here. What will it tell you if after all of this mess, Beast Games comes out and it's a wild success for Amazon Studios? And we actually kind of learn the show is incredibly successful. It finds its audience, and all this production mess kind of gets buried way, way back.
Oh, we're all screwed. Things should not. This should not be the norm. We should expect better of our media and the people who make it. Support your local workers.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Steven, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. I should add that neither MrBeast nor Amazon Studios responded to our request for comment. Steven Asarch is a digital culture reporter in New York. You can read his piece in Rolling Stone magazine. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. All right, look, it's fall. And fall means it's book award season. And some big ones for fiction are coming up. You have the Gillers here in Canada. You have the National Book Awards in the United States. But here's the thing. This year, more than half of the books on the long list for both of these prizes are published by Penguin Random House. PRH has been dominant for a while. That is not a new thing. And that's a lot of power. For one publishing house to have a huge presence in these nominations feels like one of those things that we should talk about, we should question. And I say that as someone who's had their own book published by McClellan Stewart, which is owned by, you guessed it, Penguin Random House Canada. Maris Kreizman has been thinking about this too. She wrote about Penguin Random House dominating the National Book Award nominations for her book newsletter, The Maris Review. Maris, welcome to the show, friend.
Thanks for having me. It's so good to be here.
Of course, it's a delight to have you. Listen, let me ask you this: how did you feel when you first saw all like the long list for the National Book Award this year?
I was so excited. They chose a ton of excellent books, some of my favorites of this year. It was only when I stopped to think about it and took a step back and checked out who their publishers were that I got a little bit of a sinking feeling.
Tell me about that sinking feeling. Why did the sinking feeling come up?
Well, so I can't imagine that anybody having a monopoly in any kind of creative industry is healthy. And I feel like people have been saying for a long time that the book industry is in trouble, and it feels like it's getting there.
Well, we should also make it clear, like, you don't think that anybody ended up on these long lists based on who published the book. Like, that's not the thing we're talking about, right?
Absolutely not. The National Book Award judges are trying to elevate the books that they think are the best. I believe that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. I just think that it just so happens that PRH is putting out a lot of good books, which is weird because it's really exciting. And then it's also a little unsettling.
Okay, I want to get to the unsettling part in a moment, but maybe we'll set the stage a little bit. People might remember that Penguin Random House wanted to buy Simon & Schuster a few years ago, but then that deal fell through because a judge said this merger would be bad for competition. The CEO of Penguin Random House, PRH, has talked about what the company decided to focus on instead. Do you want to talk about that? Because I don't think a lot of people know about this story.
Yeah, I mean, this was in the New York Times, and it stopped me cold. So after the PRH merger with S&S fell through, and this fell through because the reason why they wanted this to happen in the first place was to create a big publisher that compete with Amazon, who does actually have a monopoly in the book spelling space. But after that fell through, the CEO told a reporter for the Times that he still needs to find a new strategy for increasing the market share. So he said that much of its growth will have to come by selling more books. And he said that hopefully AI will help, making it easier to publish more titles without hiring ever more employees.
And that's the part that stopped you cold.
We don't like that.
Not around here. No, we don't. Listen, I should say that even with PRH having all this power, the thing that people fear hasn't happened. And I think that's important to name. It's not like they're only publishing incredibly commercial books and nothing else. You acknowledge, and I think I would also acknowledge, that good books are still getting published and getting out in the world. So help me out here. What does it mean to have basically a single company at this point, or like a company largely kind of shaping our tastes in books right now? What does that mean for us?
Yeah, PRH, along with 4 other major imprints, are known as the Big Five in the US. And the Big Five really controls a lot of the conversation about literature these days. And there are so many different voices that don't get to be a part of the conversation then when the corporate publishers have all that power. Indie authors need our help, I think.
Okay, let's talk about that. How does one support more independent publishers? Because that's always the answer that you get back in these moments. You go like, well, there are independent publishers and they are trying their best at this moment. So how do we sort of turn the spotlight towards them, you think?
I would say first and foremost, there is one National Book Award nominee from a small press that I want to shout out. And that's Sam Sax's novel, You're Dead, from McSweeney's. And then, yeah, it does take a little work. I would name some indie presses that I think are great, like Grey Wolf and Catapult.
Yes.
But it does take a little more work.
Yeah, I think like that's the part that's sort of often missing in this conversation, right? Is the idea that it takes more work on the consumer to sort of go
Yes.
out and try to find the work that small publishers are sort of publishing. You've also written about another publishing company that launched earlier this year, which is Authors Equity. And Authors Equity has an entirely different business model. Can you explain what that business model looks like?
Yeah, instead of being paid advances on book earnings, authors published by Authors Equity will share in any profits the book generates. And that's exciting in many ways, except
Uh-oh. Go ahead.
they're relying on, for each book, a publishing team that includes editors, publicists, and marketers who will be assembled from a growing pool of freelancers. And rather than offering bookworkers the stability and the benefits of full-time employment, Authors Equity will rely on the gig economy. Growing pool of freelancers is a terrible euphemism for jobs are disappearing and more of us are fighting for scraps by competing for freelance gigs.
I tell you this, Maris, somebody listening to this conversation is going to go, wow, I knew the book publishing industry was in a bit of a crisis, but is there any reason whatsoever for hope? And so I want you to speak to that person who's like looking for a glimmer of hope. Do you see one out there right now?
The books are still good. The books, they keep coming and they are still good. And the majority of the people who work in publishing are also very good, the ones on the ground in particular. So that's the thing that guides me every single day.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that even as you look at these books and go like, these are good books. These are good books published by a large company that has a lot of influence over the marketplace. It's still good to remember to revisit this question. The idea that like, you know what?
Yes.
It's still coming from a single source. I think that's a good thing for us to sort of keep paying attention to. Maris, do you have any recommendations as we go out here?
Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner is getting a lot of buzz for the National Book Awards.
Yeah.
And then one book that didn't get a long list nomination, but that I loved is Color Television by Danzy Senna.
Oh, I love a recommendation. Maris, it's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, friend. Really appreciate it.
It's a delight.
Of course. Anytime. Come back anytime. Maris Kreizman is a writer in Brooklyn. She's a columnist for LitHub and writes about books for her Substack newsletter, The Maris Review.